Hello and welcome to another Big Finish review. In this Big Finish review, I'll be looking at the Starmen, the first monthly range story from 2017, part of the new 5th Doctor trilogy, and it sees the return of the Season 19 TARDIS team, and this is their first outing in the monthly range. So without further ado, let's look at the presentation for this audio, then we'll go into my thoughts on the story. So for the cover, we've got the TARDIS crew there, we've got some equations, a spaceship there, another one there, we've got the Starmen, a planet, and some nice sort of fiery stuff there, and the red coral in the background, which is quite a main part of the story. And then we've got the 5th Doctor banner there, the spine, and the back. So do feel free to pause if you want to know what this story is about. And of course, you get the cast list and the total running time being 2 hours. So if we open it up, we have advertisement for the next instalment in the trilogy, the Contingency Club. Then we've got advertisement for Doctor Who magazine, production credits, and the reversible cover, which just looks magnificent because the cover is just one of the best Big Finish covers, I think. And the disc art is exactly the same for both discs. So what do I think of the Starmen? Now, Andrew Smith returns to the main range after bringing back his creation of the Marshmen back in 2015. So I guess it was time to bring back everyone's favourite mathematical genius, Adric. So was this a triumphant return for the Season 19 TARDIS team after the highly regarded 5th Doctor box set? Answer is no, this definitely was not a triumphant return for the 5th Doctor and his Season 19 TARDIS team. Episode 1 very much reminded me of the first part of Four to Doomsday, with it basically being the TARDIS crew exploring the ship. So in that sense, it certainly feels like a Season 19 story, with it being futuristic with human history and it being quite a crucial point in mankind's development across the stars and scientific ideas. But we do get a few nice mysteries of the IMC, what happened to the Kepler, and the red coral plot. But overall, this part just drags and the pacing is just all over the place. And little did I know that would be a common feature for this story, the pacing just being all over the place. And it felt very generic, like I've experienced this story before. You know, when you read the blurb and you listen to the first part, you think, yeah, this is kind of generic, like I've experienced this story before. It reminded me a bit like Embrace the Darkness to some extent. And the cliffhanger was just really odd. It just felt rather abrupt. It felt like Andrew Smith was like, oh crap, I need to wrap up episode 1. And there was this really brilliant moment, really tense moment, what could have finished episode 1, with Adric trying to realign this telescope to stop this spaceship crashing into the Gallius. And if you put that against the actual cliffhanger and swap them round, the story would still make perfect sense, and I think that would have been a much more of a fitting way to finish part 1, with will the ship crash into the ship, and will Adric be able to stop the ship crashing in time? Part 2, however, is a great improvement, but it still has its flaws of pacing, with scenes just becoming rather dragged out for the sake of it. But this part is very much plot thread overload, with it trying to cover a fair bit, but this part does create some great imagery with you imagining all these nebulas. What makes this part so successful in my eyes is the red coral plot, with it being quite infectious and does lead to some great bits of body horror, and the coral can change into a gas, and that does remind me very much of Fury from the Deep and Aquitaine to a degree, with the fact of what it does is create quite some nice tense moments, and it's sort of being quite an interesting take on a base under siege, and it raises the question, who are the Starmen? And it has a fantastic dramatic cliffhanger. Part 3, has to be said, is the most engaging part of the story, as it's full of action with the stakes arisen even higher, with this part being rather gruesome, with people being gassed to death, which makes the story feel quite eerie at times, and the music just adds to the tension, with it showing the Starmen mean business, and with us seeing the full power of the Starmen. But despite all that, yep, you guessed it, there is a problem, and yep, it's pacing. Again, the cliffhanger, the most crucial part to make the audience tune in again. This part had 2 potential moments where I think, yes, wow, that would be a perfect way to finish this part off perfectly. However, Andrew Smith played it safe and went down the predictable line, with the same thing happening to Tegan 5 minutes earlier. Again, like part 1, if you swapped around the moment which I think would close the part off perfectly with the actual cliffhanger they used, the story still would not suffer from it, and I think it would have made more of a dramatic ending for the story instead of the predictable one they used, what happened to Tegan 5 minutes earlier on in the part of the story. The story is still building stuff when it should start to wrap things up. But this part does have nice character moments with Adric and Autumn, and the Doctor reunited with his companions. As for the Starmen demise, I would say it's a satisfying end. And also this part does touch upon time and going back to save someone, which would briefly be touched now on to characters. The Doctor, Peter Davison. As you know, I have new appreciation for his Doctor, and he's become one of my favourites. And Peter does a fantastic job with him having a brilliant confrontation with the Starmen in part 3. With him being quite authoritative and aggressive, and with the Doctor being being pushed to his breaking point, and him trying to be quite defiant. And I also love his fascination in naming all the nebulas and showing his knowledge. And also, he can be witty at times, and him being quite determined to find Tegan after all those deaths, and him being quite concerned with time being altered, as this is a crucial point. Matthew Wardhouse. Now this is a great story for Adric, as it's full of his mathematical stuff, which is used effectively. And not only that, Adric gets a girlfriend. Yes, you heard me right, Adric gets a girlfriend. I know, it's quite shocking. He can be quite, at the start of the story, he's quite downbeaten, and he can be quite temperamental, but he does get his fantastic moments in part 1 when he's trying to realign the telescope. He's quite quick thinking, and Andrew Smith has just made Adric more of a well-rounded character. But as for Matthew Wardhouse's performance, it takes a bit of time to get used to him on Big Finish, as when you listen to Adric on Big Finish, it seems like Matthew Wardhouse is trying too hard to sound like, you know, a 16-year-old boy, and it just doesn't work. I mean, once you sort of start to get into the story, you sort of do kind of forget about it, but there are moments when you think, oh, that doesn't sound right. Nyssa, Sarah Sutton, gives a great performance with her seeing all sides of her character, with her scientific side, with her examining the coral and her scientific knowledge, and her being quite brave with risking to get a sample of the coral, and her caring side, her concern for the Doctor and Tegan's well-being. And she's paired with Adric, much like Forty Doomsday. But my only problem with Nyssa within this story is that she's very much pushed aside in part 1, which is a negative. Tegan, for me. Janet Fielding. Yep, traditional Tegan, moaning about Heathrow. She's rather witty, quite sarky, and she just has some great interaction with the Doctor, and her being quite pessimistic. And what I like about Tegan in the story is beneath her fiery exterior, we see her vulnerability, and I just like that we can see, you know, Tegan's vulnerable side. And Janet Fielding just gives a wonderful performance. Autumn, played by Sophie Wu, Adric's girlfriend. Woohoo! I know. Yeah, she's very much like Adric, but without the annoying bit. She can be quite snappy, she's very knowledgeable, and she has great chemistry with Adric, as you would expect. She's rather confident, and she's brilliant. She's just quite quick thinking, and she's a very nice character. Carla, played by Sue Holderness. Great performance. What I love about her character is she just doesn't take any of the Doctor's nonsense at the start, and she just doesn't have time for him. She's been quite powerful, she's quite bossy, and she's quite understanding, and she has quite a nice character progression. You know, with her being quite concerned and horrified, and you just feel sorry for her at the end of the story. Rovers, played by Peter Guinness. What a chilling performance, with him being quite sinister, and Rovers himself being rather arrogant and saying we will succeed no matter what. And what I like about the Starmen themselves is they're very much sort of, you get the sense that they are a danger, they are a sense of threat to the universe, and they are very much a 1980s monsters. Just look at the design. They do feel like they're from the 80s, and I feel like if they were done on TV, they would look very much like the androids from Earthshock and the Rastron Warrior robot. And I feel like they are monsters what fit in well with sort of season 19, as they're quite a sort of scientific concept monster. So overall, what do I think of the Starmen? Well, this story feels like it's trying to juggle with all these different plot elements, and it's just failing, as it's losing sight of what it's trying to achieve, with no real main focus for this story. And the story itself could have actually worked just as well on the Gallius, but I will give Andrew Smith credit for being adventurous and showing the grand scale. But that grand scale thing just falls apart, and it introduces things for the sake of it, and just the pacing. That's my main problem with this story, is the pacing. The pacing is just so off. You know, seem rather dragged out, and just, you think I could cut that there and that'll be fine. And the cliffhangers as well. The cliffhangers, they're one of the most crucial parts of Doctor Who. And if the cliffhangers aren't good, then you're not going to succeed very well. You're not going to get the listener to go, oh, I really want to know what happens next. The story just didn't engage me in that front. Now, by the sound of it, you might think, God, is this the worst Big Finish? You know, do I hate this story? And the answer is no, I don't hate this story, and this isn't the worst Big Finish story out there. There are just better Fifth Doctor audios to experience. And, you know, it's just a story. What I'm trying to say is it's not a story I would write home about saying, oh my god, you need to check this out, this is a magnificent audio. Because if I said that, I'd be lying. Yes, it does have its good moments, like the sound design, the cast are fantastic, and the ideas, what it does have, are great. But it's just trying to form a coherent story. It's got so many things going on, and it just lacks something, and I can't put my finger on it. Maybe it's the cliffhangers, I don't know, but there's just something not right, and I think the pacing is probably the main issue I have, alongside the cliffhangers. But it does have some nice moments, you know. The music's great, and when it does have a great moment, it has a fantastic moment. You know, it does succeed in some fronts. But I suppose I better rate this story. And I'm going to give the Starmen a 6 out of 10. A decent rating, above average, so it is an interesting story. I mean, if you want to experience a Season 19 TARDIS team audio, then you might want to give this a miss. If you're a fan of Adric, then definitely check it out, because it is a good story for him. But I would definitely pick the Fifth Doctor box set over this so far. I mean, granted, I haven't listened to the Contingency Club yet, and Zoltis isn't out yet, so who knows, those two stories might be absolutely phenomenal. I did have the same problem with the last Fifth Doctor trilogy, Waters of Amsterdam, Aquitaine and Peterloo Massacre. That Waters of Amsterdam didn't really engage me, but then the other two stories were just phenomenal. So this might be following the same path. I hope it is, because the Contingency Club interested me a lot, and Zoltis sounds like a very 80s story. So this might be the weak link in the trilogy, and I don't think the trilogy links in any way. So that concludes my review of the Starmen. Hope you guys have enjoyed this review, and I'll see you in my next video, which will be a birthday collection update. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in that. So thank you very much, and bye bye.